Hello, everybody. I'm Daisy O'Neill, and on behalf of my co-authors Max and Regan, I'm presenting our paper where we take a feminist perspective, grounded in fat liberation, to critically explore the norms and narratives embedded into the design of food tracking applications. Before we begin, I'd like to share a content warning that this video discusses the use of food tracking apps, including the tracking of calories and body weight. We also discuss disordered eating and the prevalence of anti-fatness within these technologies. In this paper, we contribute an analysis of how design decisions in food tracking apps perpetuate harmful normativities and sociocultural narratives from a feminist perspective. With this work, we also add to the call of fat and feminist scholars and activists that food is a feminist issue, and we need to be treating it like one within the HCI community. To support the community work towards more feminist futures for food and nutrition, we conclude our paper with alternative narratives to design from, ones that move away from harmful anti-fat bias and instead attend to healing our relationships with food and our bodies. Food tracking apps primarily ask users to track their food and drink intake, and to track their body weight. They can also connect people with others and allow people to access educational content. While often used under medical supervision in a healthcare context, the rise of diet culture and public health recommendations have led to many people using commercially available apps without professional guidance. While these apps can be helpful in certain situations, for example, understanding food intolerances, they've also been shown to cause harm, for example, facilitating and promoting disordered eating. Whether they will create benefit or harm may depend on specific aspects of their design. For example, their features and functionalities, their interaction attributes, or the embedded narratives within them. We, as researchers and designers of food tracking apps, can play a key role in mitigating potential harm. To do that, though, we need to understand how individual design decisions perpetuate certain norms and narratives. To surface these norms and narratives, we used the walkthrough method from Light and colleagues to examine 3 apps. The first is MyFitnessPal, which is marketed based on calorie tracking and weight loss. Noom, while also having similar features, instead positions itself as an anti-diet approach, claiming to focus on well-being and behavior change for weight loss. Finally, 8 decenters weight loss altogether, instead focusing on self-reflection using mainly images to visually track your food. The walkthrough method involves step-by-step observation and documentation of an app's screens, features, and flows of activity. We chose it for its strength in connecting how seemingly small design decisions are actually situated within a much wider cultural context of apps as socio-technical artifacts. To simulate typical app interactions over a period of 3 weeks, we adopted a persona approach, using a fixed food menu and weight trajectory. This approach made sure that we covered a variety of scenarios while also avoiding personal harm. I'll now present just some of our insights, but of course, our paper has much more comprehensive analysis if you're interested in learning more. In our findings, we surfaced 3 normativities embedded into the design of the apps, including food and nutrition, health, and bodies. We also surfaced 3 narratives, including embodiment, quantifying and simplifying health, and neoliberalism and the individualization of health. First, our normativities around food and nutrition. Here we ask, what is a healthy diet according to the app? We surface how apps communicate which foods are healthy or unhealthy, the moral value of food, and the role and power that food can have. For example, all 3 of the apps explicitly state that there is no such thing as good or bad food, that foods do not have moral value. However, we also see that it's often contradicted. For example, here you can see in the Noom app a lesson where users are told in tip number 5 to lose the labels of good and bad food. However, in tip number 6, users are immediately encouraged to ditch sugar-sweetened drinks, effectively labeling them as bad food to be avoided. Next, we surface normativities around health, where we ask, what is health according to the apps? Here we surface how apps communicate about what constitutes health, how they equate health with weight loss, and how they pay attention for disordered eating. For example, all 3 apps address disordered eating. Noom, as you can see here, asks users during the onboarding quiz whether they have an active diagnosis of an eating disorder. If the user indicates yes, they're not able to progress any further in the app and they're instead redirected to a support page. However, we found that this can be really easily bypassed by deleting and reinstalling the app. We also find that they fail to ask about previous history with disordered eating, as well as ongoing behaviors that don't have an official diagnosis. We also find that despite these precautions, disordered eating behavior is also facilitated by all apps. For example, we tracked only 1,000 calories for 3 days in a row, well below a safe calorie intake for our persona. Then we logged a reduction in body weight. This weight, as you see here, was still celebrated by the app, regardless of how it occurred. Finally, we surface norms around bodies, where we ask which bodies are valued by the app. The most articulated body in all apps by far is a fat body. Fat bodies are framed as signifying laziness, low self-worth, and living an unfulfilling life. We also found that this anti-fat bias makes weaponizing the fear of fatness the most prominent approach for motivation taken within the apps. For example, in MyFitnessPal, after completing a daily food log, users are presented with a projection of their weight 5 weeks into the future, if they were to eat the same way that they did on that day, every day. In this case, a projected weight gain seems to serve the purpose of warning users of some kind of undesirable future as motivation for changing what they eat the next day. Next, we answer the question, what sociocultural narratives are embedded within the apps? The first narrative is around embodiment. Here we surface how apps facilitate or encourage users to recognize and honor their hunger and tune into or ignore bodily knowing. For example, the 8 app draws particular attention to the physical experience of eating food. You can see here that it encourages users to track, amongst other things, whether they feel satisfied, still hungry, happy, stuffed, or sick after a meal. Being able to select multiple options acknowledges the plurality that you can feel simultaneously both stuffed and also very happy. However, there's also a pervasive narrative within all 3 apps that hunger is something to trick yourself out of. For example, in the MyFitnessPal app, users are assigned a task to try drinking 3.5 liters of water today because it's important for feeling full, while the Noom app encourages users to eat an entire 3-pound watermelon because it only has 409 calories, and despite making you stick to your stomach, it will keep you full for hours. Next are narratives of quantification and simplification of health. Here we surface how apps render nutrition into a quantifiable equation, and the way that they suggest that the act of self-tracking alone somehow improves health. We also show how these apps promote the idea that good health is very simple to achieve if you follow their guidelines, even though they do admit that tracking your food consistently is very difficult. For example, each time the MyFitnessPal is opened, it greets the user with an equation, calories remaining equals goal minus food plus exercise, and this is kept front and center during the app usage. And while you can customize which 3 nutrition values are displayed, calories are always displayed and cannot be turned off. We also find that apps simplify health as being easy to attain if you follow their simple steps. This simplification is both overt, for example, Noom's marketing slogan is "Noom makes it easy," as well as more covert, such as the many articles in MyFitnessPal's newsfeed that promise simple fixes for health. For example, live by this simple rule to be instantly healthier. Finally, are narratives around neoliberalism and the individualization of health. Here, we surface how the apps emphasize individual responsibility over communal or systemic approaches to health. Health is framed as an individual endeavor, reliant on personal willpower, and as something that requires continuous labor. We also surface embedded narratives around whether food and pleasure need to be earned, the emphasis that the apps place on self-understanding, and the way that paternalism permeates the apps. For example, we find that throughout the food tracking apps, bodies are framed as problems to be solved, and they're expected to be constant projects of improvement. You can always be healthier, you can always be thinner, you can always eat better, and you can always feel better. For example, in the Noom app, we tracked 3 days of meals which perfectly met all of the nutritional, calorie, and weight targets set by the app. On the next day, a pop-up appears that says tap analysis to see how you can make your next meal an even healthier choice. While the promotion of eating even healthier food might initially seem like a positive thing, there's no recognition in that moment of the effort required to eat and log nutritionally perfect meals for 3 days straight. In this way, optimizing nutrition is rendered into this Sisyphean challenge that has no end in sight, despite the app's features suggesting that finite success is possible. Overall, by taking a feminist perspective grounded in fat liberation, our findings demonstrate how seemingly small decisions made during the design process of food tracking apps accumulate to perpetuate much wider, harmful normativities and narratives about food, health, and our bodies. If we understand technologies as situated cultural actors, it's actually no surprise that we find anti-fat bias is structurally embedded into the design of food tracking apps. And our findings actually echo what fat justice scholars and fat liberation activists have been highlighting for years. Pathologizing and weaponizing fatness is structural and pervasive, especially in domains which label themselves as care. This harm is also compounded along intersecting marginalizations, with anti-fatness being deeply rooted in racism and ableism. We end the paper by solidifying food as a feminist issue within HCI, arguing that by adopting feminist HCI practices when designing food technologies, systems, and services, we can move away from framing health and bodies as a problem to solve, and instead embrace the complexities of our experiences with nutrition. We then highlight a series of tensions and conflicting narratives present within the apps. For example, the appropriation of so-called body-positive language without a meaningful commitment to intersectional fat justice. Finally, we turn our attention towards the future, offering a starting point of alternative narratives to explore, including liberation, joy, abundance, and embodiment. To summarize, in this paper, we use the walkthrough method to critically reflect on and surface the underlying narratives embedded into the design of food tracking apps. We found that apps perpetuate harmful normativities of food, health, and bodies. We also add to the call that food is a feminist issue. And finally, we present alternative narratives that could be employed in the design of future nutrition technologies. Thanks for watching, and I hope you read the paper to learn more.